Hello, welcome to FX PhD. This is Katana 101, class number 4. Now this class we're going to be starting a 2-week kind of session which is specifically on look development. This week we're going to be looking at materials and assigning them, and then next week we're going to be looking at look files and how we can kind of bake the information out so we can bring it in to apply to different models later. And that's the standard way in which you would work in a kind of a look development pipeline. Okay, so materials this week, look development and look files next week. Okay, so here we are in Katana. So I'm going to come in and load the project for this week. So just file open. And I'm going to come down to just where I've got it stored, Katana 101, class 4, and then class 401. And this is the project. I'm just going to delete my Alembic file just so we can make it together. This layout that we have here, spacebar just to bring that panel forward. This layout is the same layout that we had for the little project we did with the robot in class 2. So I'm just bringing that through just so things remain the same. It's the same camera but slightly repositioned, and the same set of lights, a key light and a fill light, again just slightly positioned for the geometry we're going to bring in. Again, I've left it set to Arnold because that's what the main focus is going to be on for this 101 course. Remember though that in the 201 course that we'll be doing next, everything is going to be focused on RenderMan, and in this class we're going to be doing a bit of Arnold and a bit of RenderMan as well. So for all you RenderMan fans, and there's many of us, let's give a bit of love in both directions. So first off, I'm going to bring in the geometry that I've made for this project, and this project is going to last us through now to the end of the course. So I'm going to press Tab and I'm going to go AL to bring in the Alembic file. Remember, if we wanted to, we could right click in the viewer, come to Other, and you'll find Alembic under Other as well. Or you could simply come to New and do the same thing, Other and Alembic. But Tab, same as in Nuke, same as in Houdini, easiest way to get things. So I'm going to spacebar back just so we are viewing everything. And in the viewer, or in the node graph rather, with my mouse over the node, I'm going to press E to bring up the green square. That kind of edits this node, putting it into the parameters here. So I'm going to come across to ABC Asset, Browse, again over to my project folder, class 4, Alembic, and you can see here I've got Pirate House, and I'm just going to go with version 02. I made a slight update, accept, and then with my mouse over the node again, I'm going to press V, that I call V for view, that loads it into the viewer and also into the scene graph. And I'm just going to right click and I'm going to close everything just for a moment. Okay, so first off we have the root, then we have world, then we have geo, just the same as we had last time, finishing up on the scene graph generator node. Then I have my Maya scene. So I have my front, perspective, side and top view. Those I want to get rid of. So again, I'm going to press the tab key and begin to type prune. And I'm going to prune or delete the bits out that I want. Now you could see that connected straight away. Now if yours don't connect, there's a couple of things you can do to adjust the way that Katana's working in the node graph. You want to go to Edit, Parameters, and under Parameters there's a couple of things that you want to change. I've switched on Snap to Grid just because you know my craziness for keeping everything as square and neat as possible. So I put Snap to Grid on. I've also turned off Sticky Drag. Sticky Drag, I'm afraid, is one of the most annoying things in Katana if it's on. So let me put it on and just show you what happens. You put it on, which seems to be the default, or it was for me. You click and drag and you now have your node under your mouse. My mouse button is still clicked. When I let go of my mouse button, instead of dropping it, it remains stuck to my mouse. And the only way I can get rid of it or let it go is to click again. So that is totally annoying. So if you come to Edit and Preferences, come down to Sticky Drag and say definitely no. Now you click and drag, and the minute you let go of your mouse, it drops it. Okay, so happy days. The other thing that I've done is I've changed one other thing. Let me just see where it is, which is basically auto connecting the nodes. I can't remember whether it's in here. Auto connect on create, yes. So I've switched that on as well, and that just basically auto connects the nodes when you first create them. Okay, so there are a couple of changes that I've found are really useful as I've been using Katana. So from here, let's go in and take this across to the merge node. A couple of ways to remember how to do it. You can either take the bottom arrow, drag it to an input, and if we delete the inputs by right-clicking and saying delete port, right-click, delete port. If we don't have an input, we can click and drag, and then you bring it into this little arrow section here, okay, and then you get a port. Okay, again, the other way would be to press the back tick, which on my keyboard is above tab and to the left of the number 1 button. It's a little tick mark. You click over the node, then you get the handle, you move over the node you want to connect into, and you press tick again and it connects. Okay, so that's now connected the geometry into the merge. I'm now going to just come to the prune and again just press V just to select the prune into the scene graph and the viewer. Now I haven't told the prune node what to do yet, so I'm going to select the front, perspective, side and top, and with the prune node open in the parameters panel, I'm going to middle drag into the add statement here, let go, and you can see that we're now pruning these elements, front, perspective, side and top, and so that has now pruned them and you can see they've gone. If we now open up Pirate House, you can see there's two things in here, high res geo and the bounding box. Right click, expand the bounding box. You can see if I go to wireframe by pressing 4 on the keyboard, you can see there is my bounding box. And if I close that, I can also come to my high res, right click, expand all. It can take a little bit longer to open because there's a lot more geometry. And again, there is my high res geo. So I'm going to spacebar just so you can see it in full, and then 6 on the keyboard just shows it shaded. So that's the same as going display, simple shaded, 6 on the keyboard. Okay, so that's the model that we're going to be shading and lighting and rendering in the rest of this course. Okay, so it's a little Lego house. Looks like this when it's rendered out of Maya using RenderMan. Okay, so spacebar back again. So the thing we obviously need to do is we need to start assigning materials, and that's what this class is all about, material assignment. So let's have a little jump back to our keynote slides that we've been going through over the last few weeks and just get our heads around how materials work inside a Katana. And we're going to be jumping back and forth again between Katana and the keynote as we go through the class. So in this first slide we can see that we have an overview of materials, and a material, as you can see here, is a scene graph location that holds one or more shaders. So basically when you make a material, you're adding shaders into that material node, and those shaders are then populating the scene graph. Now shaders can define how an object, which could be a piece of geometry or a light, so both geometry and lights are both defined as objects, interact with the renderer, and that renderer could be Pixar's RenderMan, it could be Solid Angle's Arnold, or it could be something else such as V-Ray once that's been released, or Mental Ray. Now the most common materials are either geometry materials, surfaces, displacements or bumps, or light materials. So they're the two main materials that you're going to get, and that would be very similar to what we would have in something like Maya, though in Maya, in some renderers, we also have materials or shaders that can be applied to cameras for lens distortion, but in Katana it's mainly for lights or geometry. And material assigned to an object can be viewed through the material assign attribute in the attribute editor. So if we jump back to Katana for a moment, the attribute editor is here. Attributes, just where my viewer is. And if I click on my attributes, at the moment it's empty. And the reason why it's empty is because nothing is selected. So if I just come in and grab one of these blobs. Now if you see now, what's being displayed is telling me everything about this particular polymesh or group, depending on what I've got selected. And in here, right in the middle, you can see that we have a material assign, and that material assign is blank at the moment. There's nothing that's been assigned to this. Neither a RenderMan shader nor an Arnold shader is being applied, and that's obvious because we haven't made any materials to do that. Once we do, it's viewed here, and as you move through your node graph, through your recipe, you'll potentially see that material popping in at the point in which it's been assigned, and then if it's changed as you move down through the node graph, you'll see that if any changes to that material have been made, they'll again show up in this attribute area. So this is a really good way of visibly seeing what's happening with any certain material, light, camera, or piece of geometry at any given point in the node graph or recipe. Okay, back to Keynote. So some other things about materials. At render time, a number of resolvers are applied automatically, and these include copying all the material details to a location and copying all the texture information to a location. And these deferred processes are also known as implicit resolvers. Okay, so why would this be important? Well, it has some key positive results. One is that it speeds up the initial scene graph generation because those materials and textures are basically not being resolved or used until much later on down in the node graph. So you're not having the overhead of those. And also it helps keep everything at the highest level possible, making it easy to edit and override. Okay, so this is happening automatically in the node graph inside of Katana as we're working. Now we'll come back to whether we can override that process a little bit later in the class. Now remember, and we've talked about this before in other classes as well as kind of touched on it today, that Katana is render agnostic, and that means that Katana basically is not tied to a specific renderer. So if you are wanting to use RenderMan, then you can easily do that. Katana works absolutely perfectly with RenderMan. You have a huge amount of functionality, a huge amount of flexibility using RenderMan, and obviously it's an Academy Award winning renderer, and it's being used with Katana on things like 47 Ronin, Ender's Games, and countless other movies. So huge out there at the moment, doing lots of things, obviously been around for years and years and years. Also though, the other big kind of Katana contender for rendering at the moment is Arnold, and Arnold is again making big headway into the film industry at the moment, and it's primarily being used by people like Sony Picture Imageworks on Oz the Great and Wonderful at the moment. They've just used it very effectively on Hotel Transylvania, and ILM used it on Mission Impossible 4 for the car park scene at the end. Now there's also V-Ray for Katana, which is coming soon. It was announced at SIGGRAPH 2012. At the moment I haven't been able to find any more information out about it, but hopefully it's still coming. And there's also Mental Ray, which I've heard has been used with Katana, though I've never seen it. But if it was me, I'd be going with RenderMan or Arnold. Now, there are some render limitations, and we touched on this in class 1. The first one is that available lights and shaders are specific to the renderer you're using. Okay, so RenderMan shaders and lights only work with RenderMan. Arnold shaders and lights only work with Arnold. That's obvious, right? If you're inside of Maya and you apply a V-Ray shader to your geometry and then try and render that through Mental Ray, it's just not going to work. Same as in Katana, pretty straightforward. Now you can, however, and if we have time we will do it today, you can apply to the same piece of geometry 2 or 3 different shaders. So I could say I can't decide at the point in my production when I'm doing the look dev whether we're going to go as a Pixar RenderMan pipeline for the render or whether we're going to do an Arnold render. So you could create shaders for both RenderMan and Arnold, apply them to your geometry, and then much later on in the recipe decide, okay, I'm going to render with RenderMan or I'm going to render with Arnold. And because your shaders have both been created for both those renderers and applied to your geometry, depending on which way you decide to go out, both will work just as well. So that's really useful. though I would recommend choosing one or the other towards the beginning and not put yourself through all that work, obviously. Now, when creating materials, and we're going to get back into Katana in a moment, there are primarily 4 nodes that we're going to be using, and they're all under the material something. So there's material, the material stack, the material assign, and the material resolve. So the material we already looked at in class number 2, and this basically defines a single material, which is a set of shaders, calls, and associated parameters. So basically the material node enables you to create a shader. If, however, you want to create multiple shaders, which in today's visual effects movies, there's going to be tens, if not hundreds, if not possibly thousands, you do not potentially want to create hundreds of material nodes, just because it's going to fill up your node graph and make it quite messy and difficult to manage. So there is what's called a material stack. And a material stack is a specialized group stack, and we'll talk about group stacks again in a minute, for organizing your scene materials. So if you imagine getting all of your materials and jamming them all together into a single node, that is a material stack. You then have a material assign, and the material assign is what you use to say, take this material and apply it or assign it to this piece of geometry in the scene graph. And then finally we have a material resolve, and this resolves material in the scene graph. And remember, we were saying that the Katana does the resolving right at the end of the tree. Well, the material resolve node enables you to force Katana to do it earlier in the chain, earlier in the recipe, if you want to do that. Now let's go in and make a material. So let's come back to Katana, and I'm going to just come to this area here where I've got materials, and I'm just going to do tab material. You can see there are our 4: material, material assign, material resolve, and material stack. I'm going to choose material, and I'm going to drop it here into this backdrop node, and I'm going to do tick, drag over to my merge, tick again, and that's now applied it to an input number 3. Now in my material node, I'm going to do E to edit, which loads it into the parameters panel so I can now edit it. And you can see that we now have 4 things, or maybe 5 if we include this button at the bottom, 4 things that we can do. First off is name. Now the name is the name of the material, and this is used in both the name of the node and the name in the scene graph location. So we want to name this properly. So I'm going to call this, say, white plastic. Okay, and you can see in the node graph we have white plastic, and also if we now come down in the scene graph to the bottom, you can see we're not actually seeing any material, and that's because the prune node is currently the thing that's loaded into the scene graph. You can see at the top of the scene graph it says prune here. So let's go to the merge node and just do V for view, which loads it into the viewer and also loads it into the scene graph. If I now come down a bit further, we now have materials and white plastic, and it's telling us that the type is a material, so we know we're good to go on that. Now the next one down is action, and this determines the behavior of this particular node, and we've got various options on this. So if I open it, you can see that we have create a new material, create a look file, create a child material, edit a material, override a material. Then we have namespace, and namespace is the location below the root material to place the material in. So by default the material is placed below root material. So we've got root, and then if we go all the way down to the very bottom of the material, the scene graph, you've got material and then white plastic. If the space is not blank, the material is then placed below that specific area. So say I make the namespace plastics, you can see now at the very bottom we've got materials, plastics and white plastic. So this enables us to basically start grouping things together into sections. So we can say this is where all my woods are, these are all my plastics, these are all my metals, etc. And then finally we've got this make interactive, and when this is set to yes, you can drag the object in the viewer and Katana retains the information from the viewer. So I'm going to leave that off for the time being. Once you've got this far, the next thing to do is to come to add shader. So you can see here we have a list of all the available shaders, and shaders are available depending on the renderer that you have installed. For example, we can see that we have both Arnold and RenderMan shaders installed along with viewer shaders, and if we had other renderers active like V-Ray or Mental Ray, something like that, they would also appear in the list. So this is the point where you need to decide what are we going to go with. So I'm going to go with, say, a Arnold surface shader. I could quite easily choose RenderMan as well. In fact, I'll choose both in a moment. But let's just go with an Arnold surface shader. So you can now see that we have an Arnold surface shader here. Now, if I want to change this, I can come back to Add Shader, and I can choose a PRMan shader. And now you can see that this material has both an Arnold shader and a PRMan shader in at the same point. So this is where we can now apply this plastic material to a single object and now switch between the renderers later on. Okay, so let's focus on the RenderMan one for the time being. Now, complete shameless plug, nothing to do with Katana. I just swung round while I was preparing my slides yesterday and noticed them on the shelf. 2 products you must buy: The Art of Pixar Volume 1 and 2, 100 collectible postcards. One of these was sent to me years and years ago, and I thought that is so cool. And then I got one for Christmas last year and one pack for Christmas this year. You can buy them from Amazon. It's nothing to do with Katana. It's just, they're just awesome. If you like computer graphics, just go ahead and buy these. Okay, so they're not expensive. They're just lovely. I'm trying to find a way of displaying them all, but it would take a lot of wall space. But maybe one day. Anyway, away from that, back to the course. So once we've got this far, let's focus on RenderMan and Arnold simultaneously. We come to this drop-down menu here, and this now shows us all of the shaders that we can choose. So we've got a bunch of Katana ones, and these are Katana RenderMan shaders. So you've got everything from co-shaders to normal shaders, and then you've got some standard, or not standard, but nice shaders that have also been given, things like glass, metals, etc. So I'm going to go with just a standard RenderMan Katana Blinn, named after, obviously, James Blinn, and that appears here. If I wanted to do the same thing for Arnold, I can click on its shaders, and you can see I have a different list, obviously different manufacturer. I'm going to go ahead and just choose a standard shader. Okay, so that now has assigned the shader for both RenderMan and Arnold. If you knew which pipeline you were going, as I've said before, you'll just choose that specific one at that point. Now, as we open up this, you can now see all the parameters. So if I open up the RenderMan one, you can see that we have a whole bunch of information here to do with things like color, specularity, etc. And this is where we define the shader. Now, if you're coming from something like XSI background, a Houdini background, in fact, almost anything else, you would be used to, at this point, having some kind of shader ball or teapot that you can look at and define your shader based on what you're seeing. Unfortunately, in Katana, that does not exist. There is no way like that of actually seeing what your shader looks like. There's no shader ball. So what you end up having to do is apply this to an object and then rendering the object out and then tweak the shader while you're rendering, which is kind of unusual, but it works fine once you get into it. Okay, so how would that work? Let's just go in, and I'm going to quickly make a primitive create, and I'm just going to quickly make this into a sphere, which is its default, and I'm going to apply that directly into our merge node. Okay, so there's our sphere. If I come down to my viewer and click this look through camera, I can choose the camera, and then I can look through my sphere here, look through my camera at my sphere. Okay, now I'm going to quickly come to material assign, and I'm going to do what we did last week, which is just assign that material very quickly. So I'm going to go to material assign, drag until the line goes yellow and then it's in. I'm going to take my primitive and I'm going to drop it into the cell. We'll talk all about this a bit more in a moment. And then I'm going to take my white plastic and I'm going to drop that into the material assigned here. And I'm going to come down to render, right click, interactive render, and there is my render. Now because this is set to Arnold, I'm going to have to just focus on the Arnold shader just for a moment. So apologies about that, but it's going to look very similar in that we have the same kind of controls. Okay, so as I change this color here, so I click on the little white swatch, I can come in and choose red, click OK, come over to the monitor and do / next to Z. You can see that updates. Now it's going over and over because my Arnold settings are still set to quite a high value. So I'm going to come into the Arnold globals, change anti-aliasing from 2 to 1, and let's just see what was happening with lighting. Diffuse samples, again I'm going to set that back to 1 again. Now if we do /, you're only getting 1 sample through. Now if we wanted to, we could do the same thing for RenderMan. Okay, so let's do a bit of RenderMan love as well. So we want PRMan global settings, and that's the same as what we have here. So that's going to come from here into here. We're then going to have our render settings. These are pretty much the same, so I'm just going to copy, paste, click, click, and change it from the renderer of Arnold, making sure I've got the right one, to PRMan. And I'm just going to take render, copy, paste, make sure it's connected, tick. Okay, now the one thing that I have forgotten to do, which is not going to work at this point, is remember I said that the renderer works with both the lights and the shaders. So putting the gaffer node here into the renderer isn't going to work because the gaffer node only has at the moment Arnold shaders. So I'm going to make a new gaffer node just for a moment. And I'm going to connect this into the new gaffer node. And then this is going to come back to the material assigned. Okay. Now in this gaffer node, I'm going to make a PRMan light. So I'm going to come into the little icon here and make a light. This light I'm just going to quickly make a Katana spotlight, and I'm going to look through my light by using the little icon down here in the viewer, light 1, and then I'm just going to focus in on my light on my shader ball here. Okay, so now if I come in here, right click and start interactive renderer, we'll now see there is our shader ball that we've made, our little piece of geometry. So once this is right clicked and start interactive rendering, as we make adjustments, so if I come back to my white plastic, which is actually blue, and I come down to my PRMan, I can come into my specular and I can say let's increase that. You can see now I've got my hit on here. I could change the color. So let's just go with, say, something more kind of purpley. And if I wanted to, I could come back to my Arnold section, double click, right click, interactive renderer. There's my red Arnold shader. Come back to here. This time come across to Arnold. Let's say add some spec in here, 0.7. There's our specular, and obviously the lights are in different places. So maybe bring that down a bit. And let's drop the brightness of that. So maybe somewhere here. And maybe let's just go ahead and change the color to a green color. So again, HSV to a more green color. So that's how we're kind of working with the shaders. So let's go back to our keynote for a moment. And let's look at what does all this mean? KD, KS, and we've got KR down here, we've got KT, we've got KB, we've got KSN. I mean, this is kind of confusing. So in our keynote, I've made a list of what these are, and these are not on all the shaders. So you can see there's a lot on this particular Arnold standard shader, but if we go to this Katana Blinn, this just has KD, KS, KA, and that's pretty much it. So KA is ambient, KD is diffuse, KB is backlight, KS is specular, KSN is specular Fresnel coefficient, KR is the reflection, KRN is the reflection Fresnel coefficient, KT is transparency, and KSSS is subsurface scattering. Okay. Now, what happens if we want to create multiple types of materials? So we want to take multiple materials and apply them to multiple objects. How does that work? Let's get rid of our shader ball for a moment. Let's bring back our main model. In comes our model again, and we'll just focus again on the camera. And let's just move that camera back. Now it's interesting here, you can see that although we've deleted the sphere, as far as Katana is concerned, the sphere still exists further downstream. So as we're adjusting the camera, which is further down in the recipe, this is still getting updated, even though the geometry now doesn't exist further up the tree. So it's quite clever that way. Now, obviously, if we come back to here and right click and hit interactive render, we're now going to get the new render, but we've got no materials assigned, because this material assign node here is assigning something to the material that doesn't exist, or the geometry that doesn't exist. The cell here is in fact gone. You can see the primitive we've deleted. So I could take the high-res house and copy that into here, add statement, it'll override the sphere. Now if I re-render, now you can see we're getting that render. Now you're probably asking, what on earth is all this mess going on? This is due to the fact that I have both the low-res geometry and the high-res geometry here at the same time, and they're both kind of being rendered together. So I can come in and I can delete or just isolate one of those. This is the same as a primary ray override in Maya. So the way I can do this is use what's called a visibility assign. So I'm going to come to here and I'm going to add my visibility assign just above here. Okay, and this is going to enable me to determine what is visible and what isn't. So I'm going to just close the high res down, take the bounding box, drag it into the visibility assign here, and say the visibility is off or 0. Now when we re-render, you can see that we've basically told Katana that that part of the geometry is no longer visible. If I do D to deactivate or deselect it, now I re-render, it's back again as its mess. So again, I'll leave that on just so that we've now just got the house on its own. So we talked about what happens if we have multiple materials. So let's say we're going to have this material here. We're going to call it green plastic. Green plastic. I'm going to move it over here, and I'm going to make a new material. So let's make a second material. Material here. Put it next to it. And this one I'm going to call blue plastic. So blue plastic. New material, name is going to go under plastics, same as last time. I'm going to add a shader. Because this is rendering in Arnold, I'm just going to stay with Arnold for a moment. So I'm going to say surface, choose the shader, which again I'm going to say is going to be a standard shader. Open this up. Let's go with a nice blue color, so the KD color. I'm going to double click and go with a nice blue. Bring these down, maybe somewhere like that. Okay, nice blue. And I'm going to give it a bit of specular, just so that we've got a bit of that. Okay, so this is the amount of specular this is the color of the specular. And then we've got roughness as well if you want to add that. Okay, so having these two nodes, we could, if we wanted to, merge these together. Merge these here, merge here and here, and then take this and add it to here. Once we get that off, could quite easily do that. Then we can come down to our material assign. We could make another material assign node underneath. And in this material assign, we can basically say what are we assigning to what. So this first one, let's go with this high res. Let's come in here, and let's say if we close up some of these, let's say everything is going to be assigned. So everything is going to be assigned not the white plastic, but the green plastic. And then the next one down, we're going to say, let's just take the blobs, this one, let's say just every other one will assign all of these the blue plastic. So now we've assigned everything first of all with the green, and then we're saying after that assign certain ones the blue. So if I now come down here, right click and interactive renderer, you can now see we've assigned everything green, and then we've gone over and we've overwritten some of the green with blue. Okay, but this now becomes messy. I mean, we've got two material assigns, we've got two material nodes here merging together. We've only got two materials. What happens if we have 100? It's going to be crazy. So this is where we can use the material stack node. And the material stack node is a specialized group stack for organizing our scene materials. And the materials in the stack are linked together, providing a single output by connecting them one after the other in a series. So let's make a material stack, and I'm going to make it here. When I open it, you can see that we have material stack and add. Now, in order to move these materials into the material stack, we're very used to coming down to the scene graph and dragging them from here. But for this instance, we actually do it from the node graph. So I middle mouse drag and shift the material into the material stack. And it's now physically moved it into the stack. Again, shift, middle drag green plastic into the material stack, and there it appears. So now I can connect my material stack directly to my merge. I don't need this anymore, that can go. And if I re-render again here, you can see we're going to get exactly the same result. So if I now want to make another material, I can simply say add a material. This one I'm going to call yellow plastic. Namespace again is going to be called plastic. Add a shader. I want a Arnold shader. I'm going to go with a standard again, just because I want it all to look the same. Open it up, and you can see this now looks really similar to what we've done before. So again, let's just pick a value for the spec. Let's come in here and choose, say, a yellow color. So yellowish here, something like that. Maybe something a little bit more cheerful. There, that'll do. Just OK that. Now I can come down to my material assign. I can make another material assign. And I want to make sure that they connect one after the other. This material assign, I'm going to take, say, this one, this one, this one, this one, randomly choosing some ones. Drag those into the cell to add the statement. Say these are the pieces of geometry we're going to be using. Come down to my materials. There's my yellow plastic. Middle drag into the material assign. Re-render. And now hopefully we should have red, we should have blue, yellow and green materials assigned to that. Perfect. Now the question that you're obviously thinking of is where is the material assigned stack, because we're getting a good number of these and it's getting a bit silly. So how do I create a material assign? So it's pretty straightforward. You just do tab, material assign. There's no material assigned stack. So what do we do now? What we do instead is that we use a group stack node, and the group stack node is a super tool that creates a convenient interface for mapping a list of nodes of the same type. So a group stack could basically become a group of materials, it could be a group of isolate nodes, it could be a group of prune nodes, it could be any group of nodes that are the same. Okay. Now within the group stack interface you can create any number of nodes of the same type, and these nodes are linked together providing a single output by connecting them one after the other in a series, just like we saw with the material stack node. Now this node, as I've said, is most often used if you want to group nodes that have one input and modify the scene graph in a single way. For example, a group stack node could be used to manipulate multiple collections that we haven't talked about yet, but a collection enables you to connect, or collect rather, multiple pieces of geometry that are roughly the same into a single collection. So you can make a collection of roof tiles, or a collection of bricks, or a collection of armor, whatever you wanted to use for your scene. Now, when you first create the group stack node, it's not really defined as to what it is, and you can create a node and then add to the stack list by doing shift and middle drag again. So let's just delete this, and I'm going to do tab group stack. Here it is, and I can again do shift middle drag into the group stack. Okay, once this is obviously open here, middle drag into the group stack. Now it's done it. Okay, let me undo. A better way is to select all the nodes you want to be in the group stack and do Alt G, and now they all get merged into a single group stack. So if I now open this, you can see it's a material assigned stack. These are the materials assigned, and it's ready to go. So again, if I come down to the bottom, double click, right click, interactive render, we're going to get exactly the same result. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, because we must be over time, is the material resolve node. How does the material resolve node work? Well, basically, wherever you want to resolve your setup, you come in and you add a material resolve. So let's say we want to resolve the material just after it's been assigned. We basically just type material resolve, and we just drop this in here, and we're now resolving the material at this point. So that's as far as we're going to go. If you've managed to get Katana up and running, fantastic. Continue with this scene. I'm going to continue to add proper shaders to this. I'm going to do it primarily for Arnold, but I'll do a RenderMan version as well, because we're trying to do a more Arnold focused 101 course, and then the 201 course is going to be much more RenderMan focused, but I'll try and do bits and pieces of both back and forth, so we keep it kind of even-ish. So any questions on this? I've obviously covered a huge amount of things. We've jumped around a little bit. I will save out a version 3 of this, which will be neater, and I'll try and add a few notes if that's going to be useful. But you obviously have all the slides as well, which will help you on your way. Questions in the forums, and we will come back next week in class 5, where we'll be now taking this information and saving it as a look file, which is the basis in which look development begins to take place. Okay, so until next week, as always, this has been Matt Leonard for FX PhD.